What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Movie Emporium's Netflix original documentary review of Being Eddie, the documentary about Eddie Murphy himself. Okay, so Eddie Murphy is considered one of the greatest comedians of all time. He's considered one of the greatest screen actors of all time, especially in his era. He's a guy that went from stand-up to Saturday Night Live to, of course, being a famed, film actor with stuff like Beverly Hills Cop and, of course, Coming to America. And this documentary is about an hour and 45 minutes. It chronicles kind of his rise to stardom and how influential he was to not only the people, upcoming actors and comedians that were coming into the system, but how he broke barriers for the world of not only television and movies, but, comedy stage stand-up and stuff like that. But it also talks about his kind of inspirations with people like, of course, Richard Pryor and Steve Martin and stuff like that. So it's basically a chronicling of who Eddie Murphy was and how influential he was and how funny he is and just how it's like one of those documentaries that as you get older, you want to tell about your life and how important you feel like you were to the audience and kind of looking back on who they were and adding a bunch of talking heads like Jerry Seinfeld and like Dave Chappelle and stuff like that, talking about how important Eddie Murphy was to their career. So in a nutshell, that is the documentary that is Being Eddie. It's a very atypical documentary, like a lot, like being Scorsese and stuff like that, just going into the life of Eddie Murphy. So with that said, Eddie Murphy is, I consider like one of the greatest comedians of all time. Richard Pryor's up there and Adam Sandler's up there and Steve Martin's up there. There's just people that are so talented and so committed to the work and the craft that they find ways to break barriers. And Eddie Murphy's, to me personally, is like one of the funniest comedians. I think Raw and Delirious are some of the funniest things I've ever seen. One of my favorite sketches, of course, or bits is, of course, Gumby on Saturday Night Live and, the buckwheat stuff and the turning himself into a white guy. And then, of course, you have like the Nutty Professor and stuff like that. But he's a guy who's done a lot in his 40 plus years as an entertainer in a lot of respects and has garnered a lot of praise, has some issues and stuff like that, with some of the stuff he's done and his temperaments and stuff like that. But for the most part, he is one of those people that you could pretty much watch in anything, even if it's terrible, like Pluto Nash or, Meet Dave or something like that. But he's a guy that has that charisma and that talent. So with that said, here's a documentary, an hour and 45 minutes long. And my honest opinion of this documentary is if you know a lot about his career, a lot about who Eddie Murphy is, there's not really anything new added to this. What this documentary does is it celebrates who Eddie Murphy is, I should say, not was because he's not dead, but it celebrates who he is and how talented he is. And therefore, I really appreciate this documentary. I think it's up there with like the Beach Boys documentary and some of the Beatles documentaries. And, it doesn't go too deep into like some of the negatives of Eddie Murphy. It actually doesn't really do any of that at all. It just kind of celebrates what he did and how influential he is. And, a bunch of comedians, a bunch of actors, a bunch of talent who were inspired by him, who worked with him, who, did things that were, based off his career. And it shows you kind of his early life and it shows you, how he got into Saturday Night Live and how, Eddie Murphy did a lot of this stuff. And therefore it's a very competent, it's not comprehensive, but it's a very competent documentary that's very typical for Netflix, and I really appreciate that. Depending on how you feel about Eddie Murphy's later career, the guy was really influential and really did what Adam Sandler did later on in his career, which is break boundaries for a lot of people and committed to his craft, and was is just somebody who just will be looked upon as somebody who's really great. And so therefore I just love watching this documentary for just the nature of Eddie Murphy. It doesn't hold anything back when it comes to like how he talks, and it's very R-rated, and it goes into details about what it was like to try to deal with the fame that he got as an early person, like early in his life, and how very introverted he is, and how committed he was, and how he was a guy, unlike Richard Pryor, who didn't do drugs, who didn't drink a lot of alcohol, who, apparently didn't smoke weed until he was like 31 years old. And it's a guy who was more obsessed with his art and trying to gain that fame than he was about the lifestyle. And then, like I said, in the 80s, he had the lifestyle of going to clubs and stuff like that. But as he got older and had kids, things changed. And as you can see in the movies, those things changed too, because they went from hard R movies to PG and PG-13 movies. And once again, he's not a perfect person. You saw that with some of the arrests that he had and how, he treated some people and stuff like that. And I wish they would have gone into that more. But if you're looking for something that is more of just like an exploration of how his stuff was influential and how important he was to the world of entertainment, This is like that perfect documentary. And I love listening to stories. I love looking back on like, you know, what he did and how he like help people to have careers. And you know, he's like I said, similar to Adam Sandler, like he worked with a bunch of people he liked, and he got to direct Harlem Nights with a lot of people he admired, like of course Richard Pryor. And it's just, that's what the documentary is. There's not really much else to talk about with it, because it goes into detail. It shows his family, it shows his house, which is really nice, and you know, it shows kind of how he stepped up and how he became more chill and calm and like reflective of his life. And that's what usually happens when you get older. You know, you look at things in a different perspective, and he may have been a partier. He may have like hobnobs or whatever with the rich and famous, but he always felt like he was an individual that was very grounded when he came to his what he was doing for the screen, how he was doing the Nutty Professor or Shrek and stuff like that. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the documentary of Being Eddie. Once again, it's an exploration of like kind of who he was and what he is doing, what his life is like now, and how important he was for a lot of people. So, yeah, that's Being Eddie. That's the Netflix documentary that is now on Netflix. So there you go. Anyways, with that said, that'd be my take on Being Eddie on Netflix. I do appreciate you watching. In the comments below, what is your favorite Eddie Murphy performance, movie? You know, what is the thing that you really enjoy about him? What was the one movie that you really liked? All that good stuff. But if you like what you see on this channel, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell at top to find what's coming next. If you like this video, awesome. Hit that like button. And as always, we'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out, guys.